I'm Lisa Damour, I'm a psychologist, and I'm here to make the case for stress and anxiety. I know that they usually get a bad rap, and there's no question that stress and anxiety can reach pathological levels, but that can cause us to lose sight of the fact that often, if not usually, stress and anxiety are normal, healthy, and actually useful parts of daily life. So let's start with stress. Here's what psychologists know about stress. It happens anytime humans operate at the edge of their abilities. Anything that makes us stretch will cause us to feel stressed. Now, good and bad things can cause us to feel stressed. So a bad thing, like a problem at work, can cause stress, but also good things, like taking on a challenging project is stressful, or moving into a new house is stressful. Or any of you have ever welcomed a baby into your house for the first time? No, this is a wildly stressful experience. So we just accept that stress happens whenever we are changing and adapting. Now, here's what's really cool about stress. When humans operate at the edge of their abilities actually expand. So any of you who have ever welcomed a second baby into your home know this is true. Right? It's not nearly as stressful as it was the first time because that first baby broke you in, and now you can handle 2 children relatively easily. So the way we talk about this in academic psychology is actually the inoculating function of stress. And we have research that demonstrates that when we have stressful experiences occur, we actually go on to be more durable. In fact, studies that have followed people who weather really difficult experiences, like a scary medical illness or something, and they come through it, what we find is they go on to have higher than average resilience when new difficulties come their way. So that expression, like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right, probably overstates the case, but it is definitely supported at some level by the research. So here is how I want you to think about your stress. I want you to think about it like psychological weightlifting. So we all know that in order to gain muscle, you have to lift weights that are uncomfortably heavy. That's just what you have to do. Now, psychologists also understand that in order to gain emotional or intellectual strength, you actually have to go through periods of discomfort to get there. Now, one of the things that's important is that even with weightlifting, you can't lift weights all the time. You can't lift them nonstop without getting injured. And we see stress in the same way. You can't be stressed all the time. That turns into chronic stress, which we don't like. So what we're interested in psychology is not trying to avoid stress. Stress comes with life. We're actually interested in periods of recovery. Just as with weightlifting, it only works if you actually have time to sort of recover from a hard workout. Stress is only positive and growth-giving if you have systems for restoring yourself. So I would say to you, don't worry about the stress, right? If your life is interesting at all, you're going to have stress in it. And instead, focus on how you like to restore yourself. And what we know is that everybody's systems are different. It's highly individual. So on top of getting enough sleep, you're going to figure out what your system is. So some of you may like to exercise. Some people may like to cook to restore themselves. Some people might like to watch TV, hang out with people they love. Whatever works for you, that's what you're going to want to focus on. Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting about stress. We have research showing that when people adopt a positive view of stress, it actually improves their mood and it improves their performance. So psychologists have done studies where we bring 2 groups of people into a lab and we tell them 2 different stories about stress. So to the first group, we basically say, look, stress can be helpful, it can be enhancing for you, sort of a lot of the stuff I just told you. And to the second group, we tell them what people already usually believe, which is that stress is harmful and bad for you. We then followed up with those people a few days later. And it turns out that the people in the first group reported that their mood had improved and their work had gone up in quality. And the people in the second group, they reported no change because basically we reinforced what most people already believe. So stress can be your friend, and it can do a lot for you. Okay, so now let's talk about anxiety. So psychologists have a very similar view of anxiety. We actually don't think it's all so bad. In fact, we see it as a normal, healthy, and protective mechanism that is installed through evolution to keep you safe. So the way to think about it is this. So picture a cave person who sees a saber-toothed tiger. And they have that standard anxiety response. Their heart rate goes up, their breathing changes, maybe they're sweating, they're wildly uncomfortable. And that discomfort tells them that they have to do something. So they run for the cave. That cave person survived to pass genes down to us, okay? The cave person who sees a saber-toothed tiger and is like, hey, that's a cool tiger, right? We don't have their genes. Okay, so this is how anxiety works. So in modern life, anxiety alerts us to modern threats. If we are driving and someone near us is swerving, that should make us anxious, right? And that will tell us to do something, right? Get ahead of them, change lanes, something like that. Anxiety also alerts us to internal threats. So if you're procrastinating and you start to feel uncomfortable because you really should get to your work, that's anxiety telling you to get going. So it's important that we appreciate that anxiety is a useful part of being human. So a lot of my work is with teenagers, and I'm having these conversations with them all the time. And so I say to them, look, if you show up at a party and you get really anxious when you walk in, pay attention to that feeling, right? Maybe the party's too big or it's out of control. And I say to them, don't start drinking to make the anxiety go down, right? And I will say, I think a lot of the heavy drinking we see in adolescents is that they are in situations that they know to be dicey, and yet we've given them the impression that they're not supposed to feel anxious, and it turns out like booze is like great at making the anxiety go away. I also tune them into their internal anxiety. So if I'm talking to a teenager who says, like, I'm really freaked out about this upcoming test, my first question will be, well, have you studied? And if they say no, I say, okay, great, you are having the exact right reaction, right? You should be nervous right now. And as soon as you study, you will feel better. So the bottom line is these are useful parts of life. We also have research showing that if you can see anxiety as useful, it also improves your performance. So we do these studies where psychologists bring in people into situations that are invariably stressful, something like giving a speech to a hostile audience. It's like crossing its arms and furrowing its brow. And of course, this audience is all made up of like grad students who work in the psychologist lab, right? Because it's like mildly sadistic psychology stuff. And what we do before we get these people up to give their speech, we tell half of them, if your heart rate goes up, your performance will improve. And we tell the other half, if something makes you nervous, try to ignore it. And what we find is that the people in the first group both find the task to be less demanding, and they're hooked up to monitors. They have a more efficient cardiovascular response than the people in the second group. Okay, so that's my ad for stress and anxiety. So you may be thinking, well, if this is so great, how did it get such a bad rap? And this is how it got such a bad rap, I think. Stress and anxiety don't feel good, right? They're not comfortable. And so then I think people make the leap that it can't be good. But the reality is, if you have ever exercised, you know that something that doesn't feel good for you can actually be really good for you. So here's where I'm going to end. Sometimes stress and anxiety get out of control. That can happen. Stress becomes chronic or traumatic. Anxiety is an alarm system that doesn't make sense. Even when that happens, we are really, really good at treating it. The way I want you to think about it, if you see these as helpful and useful, is that then you don't have to feel stressed about being stressed, and you don't have to feel anxious about being anxious. Thank you.